The arrival of evening. As the daylight slowly changed, people hardly noticed. The setting of the sun wasn't an instantaneous event, but a series of events. Shadows lengthened, fragments diminished, and steps slowed. No one looked at their watch, for time didn't need to be used. Feeling it was enough. In ancient times, evening was not an end, but a transition. The weight of the day continued into the night, life silently changing. Markets emptied, streets simplified, and the interiors of homes became more important than the outside world. These hours were for sharing affection rather than ostentation. As the light diminished, conversations shortened. People used their words more selectively, because summarized words took longer. Looking at the same fire, uniting in the same dim light, entering the same silence, these were the most natural occurrences of ordinary life. The proportions of rich events or poor were of little importance, because the arrival of night was a symbol of equality for everyone. Evening meals were not large, varied, or ostentatious, but they were peaceful, and peace is the most valuable wealth in this world. People accepted the approach of night. They didn't like to flee. They didn't try to create more light when the lights were being dimmed, because darkness wasn't seen as an enemy. It was the natural continuation of the day. There was no electricity, no bright lamps, no lights penetrating the night. Therefore, people knew darkness. Evening hours weren't a time for rushing. On the contrary, it was a time to learn to slow down. The pace of the day stopped, and body and mind calmed together. What we call leisure time today was, in those times, the evening itself. The interior of a house wasn't separated from the outside world. The last rays of sunlight entering through the window, the shadows cast on the walls, and the silent movements on the floor, these formed the house's way of speaking. People understood this language well. Evening taught silence as well as conversation. As everyone looked at the same fire, thoughts slowly accompanied a shared melody. Accepting the end of a day lightened the burden of the next. That's why nights were both deep and relaxing. After a while, the gas lamps would be lit, but until then, patience was needed, because that waiting was the final boundary between day and night. No one wanted to cross that boundary hastily. Now you too are at that boundary. The sound of the day is fading. Thoughts are slowing down, and soon we'll journey together back to those peaceful evenings of the past. In this video, we'll explore how people greeted evenings in times without electricity, how night became central to life, and how silence became the norm. Now, lean back, dim the lights a little, and begin to listen to how day gently gives way to night. Before sunset, the silent preparation of evening. In the absence of electricity, evening didn't begin suddenly. No one wondered, what time is it? There was nothing to show the time. Instead, duration was felt. Everyone understood when the sun changed color and the light turned to a yellowish hue. Shadows lengthened and the day slowly faded. This moment was the most critical time of the day. For someone working in the fields, it meant finishing the last tasks that needed to be completed. The land was gathered not hastily, but habitually. Tools were cleaned and hoisted, and it was time to return home. No one wanted to stay in the fields after sunset because working in the dark was both difficult and dangerous. In cities, shops closed early. A craftsman would complete his last tasks during the daylight hours. A woodworker would put down his tools. A weaver would gather his threads. Darkness did not forgive mistakes. As evening approached, this activity was not quick, but careful and deliberate. Pots were put away, food was prepared, and the fire was rearranged. The fire was extremely important. It was the spirit of the evening. The fire in the hearth was not only for cooking, but also for providing light, warmth, and security. A fire too dim brought darkness, while one too strong created danger. Therefore, evenings were a time associated with the fire. Wood was carefully selected, and the flames were slowly adjusted. The sounds in the house subsided. Children tried to be quieter, and the elderly sat and watched what was happening. Pre-electricity evenings didn't tire the mind, but rather the body, because everyone knew darkness was approaching and no one tried to resist it. One of the last things done at sunset was preparing dinner. Dinner wasn't heavy. The night was long and silent. People rested their bodies, not their stomachs. Meals were usually simple: soup, bread, and sometimes some vegetables. As evening approached, the small lights inside the houses became more prominent. An oil lamp or a small fire was enough to define a place. The area illuminated became where life unfolded, while the rest naturally remained in darkness. No one saw this as a deficiency. It was inherent in the nature of the world. During these times, people generally listened more than they spoke. The gentle sounds of the fire, the distant footsteps, or the wind whistling against the walls, evening transformed into a patient wait. The hustle and bustle of the day slowed, giving way to peace. In the days without electricity, preparing for night was both a physical and mental state. People accepted the end of the day and settled down to rest. Evening hours represented both solitude and togetherness. Sitting around the same table, looking out from the same light, and entering the same darkness was important. When the sun had completely set, the city stepped into another time. When the gas lamps were not yet lit, there was a brief pause. In this silent boundary between day and night, people waited unconsciously, because that would be the moment when the day truly ended. As the sun slowly recedes from the banks of the Nile, night in Egypt is not merely darkness. It is a time when order prevails and life adopts a new rhythm. Daylight diminishes, but life continues. Lamps burn in houses. The scent of fine oil wafts through the stone walls. These lights not only illuminate the darkness, but also soothe the soul. For ancient Egyptians, night was a time for rest and reflection. In the neighborhoods where people live, houses are close together. Built of mud bricks, these structures trap the daytime heat and provide coolness at night. People sit on simple rugs spread on the ground, discussing the day's events in quiet voices. Stories are told in whispers, not shouts. For night is a time of peace, not loud noises. Children snuggle close to their mothers, while the elderly listen silently. Perhaps history isn't written in these moments, but culture is passed down from generation to generation. At night, the Nile River takes on a completely different form. Its water, shimmering in the daylight, appears deep and dark in the moonlight. Small boats are tied to the shore. The sound of oars is silent, the water almost motionless. The river is not merely a waterway, but also a reminder of the passage of time. For the Egyptians, the Nile represented the work of the day and peace at night. Therefore, sitting by the riverbank was a habit that calmed the mind. The area around the temples is more orderly at night. After the rituals of the day, the priests leave the area silent. The echoes between the great columns cease. Only the gentle sound of sand carried by the wind can be heard. The structure of the temples is in harmony with the night. Flowing lines rather than harsh ones prevail. This unconsciously gives one a sense of peace. Before the sun completely disappeared, there was a brief pause in the city. This time was not rushed. People unconsciously slowed down, shortening their steps, because this was one of the closest moments between day and night. The lights were not yet on. The houses were not yet completely shrouded in darkness. But everyone knew that soon the darkness would increase and the sounds would fade even further. Therefore, people had learned to greet this brief moment in silence. In some houses, a small fire was lit. It wasn't a large, showy. It provided just enough light to illuminate faces. That fire not only provided warmth, but also indicated the passage of time. The day was over. There were no more children's voices in the streets. The games were over. The animals had returned to their places. The city was withdrawing into itself. At this hour, people didn't tell. Long conversations didn't take place because they needed to prepare for the night. Evening was spent listening, not chatting. The sound of the fire, the wind hitting the stone walls, footsteps in the distance, these were enough. In pre-electricity times, evening existed not for entertainment, but for balance. The hustle and bustle of the day slowed down, body and mind attuned to the night. No one tried to conquer the night, they moved with it. Thus, people didn't simply greet the darkness. In the same room, with the same light, in the same silence, the night was accepted together. As the sun slowly receded over the Nile River, life inside the houses became more distinct. People who had worked outside during the day returned to their safe havens in the evening. In ancient Egypt, houses were not merely living spaces, but centers of order, routine, and tranquility. Thick mud walls retained the warmth of the day, making the atmosphere more comfortable in the cool evening air. The houses lacked large furnishings. Low divans, woven rugs, and simple wooden stools were present. Everything was in its place. There was nothing excessive. This simple arrangement also soothed the minds of the people. Family members sat side by side, conversations progressing slowly. Voices were not raised and there was no rush as the events of the day were recounted. Time seemed to pass more slowly here. A small oil lamp burning in a corner was the only light source in the room. The flickering movement of the flame cast soft shadows on the walls. These shadows were like another presence accompanying the silence within the house. Children, tired more quickly in this peaceful environment, lay down on the mats. The day drew to a close unnoticed. Evening meals weren't ostentatious, but they were regular. Bread, dates, sometimes a little fish or vegetables. Each bite was eaten slowly. Meals weren't just for satisfying hunger. They were perceived as a ritual marking the end of the day. This ritual reminded people of the order to which they belonged. Outside, the Nile River still flowed. The river had continued its flow both day and night. The people in the houses knew of this constant flow, but they didn't dwell on it too much. Knowing that life went on gave them a sense of security. Everything seemed to be as it should be. As night fell, the city descended into a profound silence. The streets were almost devoid of life. Travelers stopped, doors closed, windows met with darkness. The ancient city was left to itself. At this hour, people lay in their homes, but were not yet fully asleep. The brief time before sleep was precious, for the mind craved a gentle transition from day to night. Some preferred to watch the fire die down, the flames slowly diminishing, the light fading. It was a conscious waiting. They didn't want to fall asleep before the fire went out, for it was the last element connecting them to the night. Thoughts at this hour simplified rather than dispersed. People didn't dwell too much on the past. They didn't make plans for the future. The mind learned to accept its present state. In antiquity, night wasn't filled with revelry. There was no thought of ignoring it. Night was a moment of pause offered by nature. People valued this pause. The silence before sleep didn't evoke the same sense of emptiness we feel today. Everyone breathed in the same rhythm, under the same sky, in the same darkness. This shared experience made the night feel safer, and when eyes closed, the city didn't become completely silent. However, sounds faded away from consciousness. Everything in the distance became a background accompanying sleep. In ancient pre-electric cities, night was not an escape, but a state to enter, and sleep occurred as a natural consequence of this state. As the sun slowly recedes its position on the Nile, the surface of the water ripples calmly in shades of gold and copper. The sun is no longer visible, but its warmth is still felt on the riverbank. For ancient Egypt, the Nile was not merely a stream of water, it was a living entity, bringing the last moment of the day and heralding the beginning of night. The boats waiting on the shore, after a day of carrying grain, earthenware, and simple objects, have settled down to rest. Oars rest against the shore, ropes loosened, no one is in a hurry in. Along the paths by the river, people who have worked all day walk slowly towards their homes. Words are short, voices low. The weariness of the day renders words unnecessary. The gentle sound of feet touching the earth merges with the whisper of the wind among the reeds. At this hour, the Nile bank is completely devoid of the day's hustle and bustle. Birds have returned to their nests, and life on the water has slowed. In the distance, the silhouettes of small settlements begin to appear. A thin wisp of smoke rises above the flat-roofed houses. This smoke indicates that dinner is being prepared and the hearths are still hot. In ancient Egypt, evenings were unpretentious. There were no grand celebrations or noisy crowds. Life was simple and orderly, both during the day and on the eve of night. Everything was in its place. The water of the Nile took on a deeper color with the darkness. The light of day was gone. Instead, an intense tranquility arrived. This tranquility had been experienced in the same way for centuries. The same banks, the same steps, the same silent turns. Time passed, but the rhythm never changed. As night falls completely into darkness, the sky slowly begins to fill with stars. For the people of ancient Egypt, this scene is unfamiliar. The same sky and order unfold every evening. The stars are not merely light, they are part of direction, time, and order. For someone standing by the Nile River, the sky is as familiar as daytime. It is observed silently, unquestioned. In houses near the bank, doors close and people retreat inside. The flickering light of oil lamps casts gentle shadows on the walls. The interiors of the houses are simple, filled with ceramic vessels, woven carpets, and low seating areas. The final moments of the day are felt without the need for words. Everyone understands that the day is ending. As the body prepares for rest, the mind also calms. Outside, the Nile continues to flow. No one stops or directs it. It is the silent observer of the night. This water, having witnessed the same path for thousands of years, has left behind countless evenings and weariness. In ancient Egypt, nights begin like this: a silent passage, unnoticed, noiseless. At these hours, the world becomes narrower. Grand structures, temples, and distant cities lose their significance. Only houses, the river, and the sky remain. Man is left alone with his surroundings. As the weight of the day slowly lightens, the atmosphere becomes even calmer. Breaths deepen, movements lessen, and night falls unhurriedly on the banks of the Nile. Everything silently prepares for the next day. Here, time knows how to fall asleep. The beginning of evening inside the house. As the day drew to a close, life in ancient cities didn't suddenly cease. It simply shifted, moving inward. Everything outside slowly entered the house. Sounds, smells, thoughts. Everything passed through the door and came inside, but it didn't remain exactly the same. A different atmosphere prevailed in homes at this time. It was no longer a place of work, but a space where people found peace. Those entering left behind the day's hustle and bustle. When the door closed, it was as if a silence had begun in the city, because in ancient times, the house was not just a building, but the final resting place of the day. Everything left outside became insignificant. Light was limited. Therefore, not every part of the house was used. Life accumulated in the parts where light could reach: a corner, a table, a fire. Nothing more was needed. In the evenings, people moved less. Sitting, settling down, and remaining still was important, because as darkness progressed, unknown areas increased. Therefore, it was preferred to gravitate towards the familiar. At this hour, conversations took on a different tone. The events of the day weren't dwelled upon. Everyone already knew. There were mostly short sentences and simple exchanges. Silence didn't replace conversation, but it accompanied it. If there was dinner, it wasn't a celebration, but it was quite meaningful. Sharing a meal from the same plate, sitting under the same light, being together at the same time, these constituted the important moments of the day. At this hour, no one planned for the future, because the evening wasn't for something in the future, but for bringing the day to an end. The day ended here. Shared time in the settlement of the night. As evening progressed, the activity within the house began to lessen. No one did this consciously. It was as if the environment was slowing people down. The dimming of the light altered the rhythm of the body. The fire or oil lamp not only provided light, but also created a boundary around it. Those within that boundary felt safe. The outside was a completely different place. At this hour, people generally looked at the same point. The dance of the fire occupied their eyes. Thoughts adapted to this The mind didn't wander as it did during the day. Not everyone in the house spoke at the same time. One person would remain silent, another would say something brief. The silence wasn't disturbing because this silence wasn't emptiness, but a moment of rest. For children, these hours were a learning period. No one explained anything to them, but the environment showed them everything. They learned how the day ended and how the night began. The elderly rested more at this hour. Their conversations decreased. Their presence was sufficient. Being home meant more to them than words. As time slowed, the connection with the outside world was severed. No news came, no calls. People didn't feel this as a loss. On the contrary, this disconnection was comforting. And when night fully settled, no one announced it because everyone already felt it. The day was over, but the peace was still there. During this journey, we touched upon many details of daily life in ancient Egypt. We followed a path that ranged from long hours spent in the fields to the simple arrangements within homes, to the peaceful atmosphere that slowly enveloped the villages after sunset. What was mentioned here weren't grand events or momentous occasions. The most important thing was how people lived, rested, and accepted time. We felt how life softened with the arrival of night, how the rush faded away. The river, the houses, the sky, and the people all shared the same harmony. No one was in a hurry. The weight of the day was balanced by the tranquility of the night. This balance remained unchanged for centuries. Ancient Egyptian nights were not only dark, they were also a moment of coming together. This was true for the people as well as for time itself. In these quiet hours, life didn't stop. It simply flowed slower, felt more deeply. Now, everything described became a whole within the night. A village, a few houses, a few people, but in reality, so much more. The simple wisdom of the past. In this video, we continued with the second part of our discussion from the previous video about evenings in the pre-electricity era. But primarily, we talked about how people shared their time. We observed moments when the day slowed down. We noticed that where the light diminished, life became simpler. We realized that evening was not a moment of rush, but of acceptance. Inside homes, around tables, around fires, and on the road, in inns, among strangers, people didn't clash with the night. They didn't try to, they simply welcomed it together. Today, lights turn on with the push of a switch. Time expands. But perhaps something from those old nights is still missing. Perhaps darkness wasn't something to be feared. Perhaps slowing down meant remembering, not losing. If this silent journey was peaceful for you, if this narrative lightened your mind a little, stay tuned to this channel. In our new videos, we will again share the peaceful aspects of the past. Unhurried stories you can listen to before bedtime. Don't forget to join us on this journey and subscribe to the channel. Let's continue to meet in the silence of the past. Good night. Home.